Thanks for tuning in to Minds of Tomorrow. I'm your host, Luis Acevedo, and with me today I have Rinat Strahlhofer. She is the founder of We Are Not Sam, and she is a former telemarketer. Rinat, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you, Luis. I'm really happy to be here sitting with you.
Likewise. So I think a good point to start off with is going to be your background and how you got started, because this conversation is going to revolve around 5G. And so I think a good place to start is your background, and that is in telemarketing. So how did you end up where you are today? If you could just give us a little bit of that journey.
Oh, that's a really, when you said, how did I end up where I am today? Something came through for me. And that was, I wasn't really ever sure where and what I wanted to do. And what had happened is I sort of kind of accidentally fell into marketing because my parents had a sort of a conversation with one of the career teachers, and she said she'd be really great in business. But at the time I wanted to do teaching. And it's kind of funny that what I do now I feel is quite an educational thing. But I ended up going on my first day to study marketing and social science at university. And this was my very first marketing lecture. And there was a university lecturer that was standing in this sort of filter-looking auditorium on the very bottom, as a stage on the bottom, with 700 students in Melbourne, Australia. And he was dressed in multicolored and multicolored earrings. And I came from a private school background, and I looked at him and I thought, what am I going to learn from this guy? And he said, I'm going to tell you one story, and if you can relate, stay in the room. But if you can't, get the fuck out. And you could just hear anything, like a pin was able to drop in that moment. You would have heard it. And he told the story of his Uncle Joe, who'd owned a hair salon in a very small town. And in that town, he had a big sign up at his hair salon, and it said, "We sell $5 haircuts." Sorry, $10 haircuts. I beg your pardon. We sell $10 haircuts. And everybody went to Joe's hair salon. And then after many, many years, a new salon was opening up, and everybody's going to Joe saying, "Hey, have you seen this new salon? They said they're going to be selling $5 haircuts. That's half your price, Joe." And so Joe came in that day with the new salon open, and he took down his $10 haircut sign and he put up a new sign. And the new sign said, "We fix $5 haircuts for $10. And that was my introduction to marketing. And that was my understanding of how it was that I was going to spend my career helping people understand that marketing is based only on perception. So your perception, it's not about statistics and numbers. People don't understand nor care about these things. They care about what it does, what it makes them feel, and how it makes them view the world. So in this case, it's, $15 haircuts if that person gets it wrong with a really, and so the perception changes in the mind. And I finished university, and I was plucked out and offered a position as a graduate at Australia's largest telco company called Telstra. And so there were 10 people chosen, and, made everybody around me very proud, my parents, and all that. And I got to go around in this organization for 2 years and do marketing in any which sort of capacity and program I wanted to do it in. And it was a fascinating role to be in because I could pick and choose what I wanted to participate in. And I got to participate in the Commonwealth Games, and eventually ended up in a group that had asked me to join them. And they were a group of 8. We were a group of 8 people that were launching the largest 3G network this country had ever seen. And so it was called NextG at the time, but we were basically able to offer 3G to Australia, when before what we'd had was, now the difference being 1G is just make a phone call, 2G is make a phone call and a text message, 3G was make a phone call and a text message and use data. So we were there to sell, this idea, market this perception of video calls and emails on the go and picture messages. And so for a lot of people, that perception was only in Hollywood films. That wasn't reality. And so our job was to show people we have these devices and look at what you can do. And at the time, it was a huge undertaking. I mean, it was a $1 billion exercise to roll out 5,000 new sites, these towers, and the budgets we had were enormous. So we were able to travel all around the country, work with the top agencies, and it was just, you couldn't look left or right in Australia without seeing an advertisement for this network. And it required people to get new routers at home. And so once I installed our router at home, many months later, my husband sort of came to me and said, look, it's been a while now, but I feel that I'm having sleep problems because of this router. So we'd released this network. We'd all gotten our 3G phones. The campaign had won so many awards. And then my husband starts complaining about sleep. And I went into the research database and I thought, gosh, how many people are concerned? Maybe my husband's just feeling stressed and he needs, a holiday, or, your brain just goes straight to thinking that he just needs to relax. And what I found was 38% of my market had concerns about health effects. So I go into my executive director's office, and under any normal circumstance, that would absolutely be an instigator for a campaign around safety with that statistic. Mm-hmm. And she, in no uncertain terms, told me to get my foot out of the door and my head out of the sand. And those are the kinds of moments that stamp you as a human being, and you recognize that there's a karmic process at play. And I didn't know it at the time, but I know it very much now. And I went to the research department and I said, look, this is the statistic that I found. It was a friend of mine. He said, look, I can't talk to you about this at work. We need to leave the office. So we left. I said, what is it that you know about safety that I don't? Because I've just spent all this time releasing this network, winning these awards. There's something that I'm missing here, and I know it in my bones. And he said, Rinat, mobile phones are being tested on a plastic dummy filled with liquid. They are literally testing in an unbiological way on a dummy called Sam. It's a specific anthropomorphic mannequin, which is just a big word for dummy. That's just the industry speak. And the campaign I've obviously developed as a result is we are not Sam, we are not dummies. But ultimately what he had said to me, I'd started speaking to my colleagues. I started speaking to my executive director. We had a new CEO. I asked him in a room full of hundreds of marketers what his stance was on this non-biological test, a test that doesn't have cells or organs or DNA. It's just literally a dummy. They put a thermometer in his liquid gel head. He's a plastic dummy with a liquid gel head, and they measure whether or not he will heat up by more than 1 degree Celsius after a 6-minute call, sometimes a 30-minute call, but usually a 6-minute call. And if he doesn't, then that phone is deemed safe. And the industry only tests one device in a laboratory of their choice. And if it passes, millions of those devices get sold on the market worldwide. And that is still the testing that we're seeing today with 5G phones. And it's a non-biological test because it was to usher in addiction. Now we have a society addicted to technology that was never safety tested in the first place. And where it's leading us to is surveillance. And that's the real danger of technology.
Yeah, because that's sort of the narrative behind 5G is the Internet of Things. And a lot of people allude to it being, not even allude to, they explicitly state that it's for a surveillance state. Now, there are a lot of questions that come about from that story, your background that you were just telling us. And thank you very much for going so in depth. Now, one thing that I'm curious about is, as you were describing the 1G and 2G, now, were there any did these problems just start with 3G, or have the communication devices always been sort of damaging to humans in some way?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because Children's Health Defence actually won a landmark case last year in August because they had 11,000 pages of evidence to show there was biological harm from 2G, from 3G, from 4G. And that is why they won. They could prove that this safety test that I'm talking about, Sam, was negligent and it was fraudulent. And all of the biological effects, the 2,000 peer-reviewed reports are showing immune dysfunction, oxygen depletion, sleep disturbance. It goes on and on and on. And where the industry actually get it wrong, and also where we as society sort of fail to understand, is they think, well, I don't have cancer, therefore I don't believe that this has any negative effect on my body. But it is a technology that very much pulsates at such a rate that it takes, like tobacco and asbestos, it can take a decade to develop something more severe, such as cancer. But the effects of like sleep disturbance and brain fog and immune dysfunction, these are apparent in our societies today. And the thing is, I'm not anti-technology. I just choose to use it in a more mindful and discerning and safe way. There is a way to use technology safely through Ethernet cables, and fiber optics is much safer, faster, and more secure than 5G. We have technologies available to us that are safer, but because they're not offered, and we don't take that sort of binge screening, self-regulating, and take that into our own power. In other words, that we actually make more discerning choices with our technology. A lot of people just use it when they're bored. They're just using it to take themselves out of the natural moment that's presenting itself. It's a way for distraction, and that's what addiction does. And that's why they're feeding addiction, because they don't want us in the natural world experiencing things, through the physical. They want us experiencing everything through the online world. And the best connections we'll ever have in our lifetime are offline, whether it's with nature or with human beings, etc. And that's why there's so much power in our hands, whether we choose to hug someone or, what we're going through here in the Northern Rivers, the ability to really offer something with your hands. Our hands have so much sensory power to perceive the world. And I talked about perception as my very first story. And they're turning our hands into blunt instruments because of this tech handling, that we cannot let go of technology. And therefore we start to believe that it's part of who we are. And people think, oh, I feel naked without my device on my body or in my hand. And they take themselves out of the moment constantly. Where we are, we have whale watching season every year. And the amount of people that will see a whale, and I'm right in front of them, and I'm totally immersed in this offering of a whale that's in breach. And the majority of people are looking at the whale through the lens, but the whale is right there and they're looking at it through the lens. And that is because we are so addicted to the dopamine hits of what people like about us, what we can post about ourselves, that we're actually losing sight of what technology is getting in the way of. And it's getting in the way of us immersing ourselves in the moment. And that's why we're here. Fundamentally, why we are here in this moment in time is to have a full experience. And that experience is being interrupted with by technology that is needed 24/7 when it shouldn't be.
So it sounds like these telecommunication companies are basically, it's like the Wild West. There's no regulations as far as what they're doing, with these new technologies that are developing, whether it be 3G, 4G, 5G. So is that the case, or are there any regulations? Like, are there any standards that need to be met in order for a device to be put out? Or are they are they, navigating the waters very carefully to circumvent rules, or are they just doing whatever they want to do?
The only safety test in the industry is a plastic dummy filled with liquid. That is the only test. That is an international standardized test. And that is why all these devices are coming out on the market. And children are being told to put iPads on their laps and to educate themselves on devices, when if you look deeper into this plastic dummy, what they did is they actually took a military recruit back in 1989, and they looked at this guy and said, this is our ideal mobile phone user. And it was the top 10% of military recruits. And he was 6'2" tall. He had a 5-kilogram head, the strongest men in our society, 100 kilograms. And they based a dummy on his 5-kilogram head shape, put it with liquid. And they said, this is the representation of safety. And even if you take the 6'2" tall adult male, 5-kilo head, that's only 3% of the world's population. So women, children, elderly, they're not even considered in safety. And to be honest, it's 100% of the world's population, because no one's a dummy and no one's head is just liquid. And so it's not taking into account, our reproductive organs. It's not taking into account anything other than heat. So it's like measuring the effect of tobacco based on how much your body heats up. It's a ridiculous test.
Really quick on that, why are they just measuring heat? Like, what's the point of just measuring the heat that it's radiating, that it's generating?
Their sort of point of view is that if it doesn't have a thermal effect, that it doesn't have any effect. Okay. And so that's why it's a non-biological test, because we have wiring and firing of the brain, we have cells, we have DNA, we have so much information in our body that takes on electromagnetic radiation. We are electromagnetic beings. So the fact that you would measure for something that doesn't even account for anything electromagnetic, it's quite fascinating in and of itself. And I think in generations to come, they're going to look back and go, what were they thinking? And here we are trying right now to get people to understand that if we actually have proper safety standards and testing in place, we could use technology in a safe way, and we could teach our children to use it in a more discerning way. But they're just bombarding us with so much technology, with so many new devices, that most people don't actually know how to have even a few hours, 3-4 hours in a day, without a device being present, because we're so attached. And if you understand what's called the peripersonal space, it's the science that what we touch very often, our body starts to map it out as part of us. So if you're someone that drives a lot, drives your car, your body maps out that car as part of you. And so sometimes you might catch yourself like ducking when you go under a bridge and you're not sure, but that's the peripersonal mapping out your car. So what happens if you're mapping out your device as part of you and you're saying to yourself, like, I cannot distance myself from this thing? And that is very much the transhumanism agenda. It's getting us to understand and to feel how we cannot live our lives and we cannot function without a device present.
Yeah, that it's funny that you bring that up, because that's where my mind went as soon as you said that it's making us, feel as if the phone, the technology, is a part of us. Because that's right in line with transhumanism. It's sort of like a slow build to accepting merging with a machine, if you will, on a like actual level. But something else that I was thinking of too, that I know a lot of people seem to put the 5G narrative in like the conspiracy category. And if they put it in the conspiracy category, therefore it's not real to them until it becomes real. But it makes me think about the fact that something as simple as ultrasounds actually can, manipulate the makeup of the fetus in a that a woman's carrying. Because my wife and I, we are now we're going to do a home birth for this pregnancy. She's pregnant right now, and we actually, our twins, they were C-section. We had all the ultrasounds, the stereotypical pregnancy, because we thought that's what you should do. And then we've learned a lot since then. And now with this other child, we're doing the home birth. And so at the midwife, she actually schooled us on ultrasounds and how they actually can damage the baby. And that's something that I thought was really disturbing that nobody discloses. It's not even something that the medical field will tell you, that there's a potential chance that, your child will face damages that, we can't really measure or anything like that. And so my whole point with bringing that up is there's a lot of these kind of technologies that have horrible side effects on us that we have no clue about.
Absolutely. And one that comes to mind when you're speaking on that topic is baby monitors. Baby monitors are radiating children non-stop when they're sleeping. And people think, oh, that's a safety measure to make sure I can see my baby and hear my baby. But that baby, most likely in a lot of cases, is uncomfortable or unsettled because of the level of radiation that's on in the house, the Wi-Fi, the baby monitor. If you were to take a meter, to measure the router or to measure the baby monitor, you'd be shocked at what you would find, and you wouldn't have that device near your child or near your newborn. And, the thing about 5G and that proximity to our bodies is really how it's so different to 4G. And so people say, well, what's the difference between 4G and 5G? And it's not that 5G replaces 4G. It's not a replacement. It's an addition. So 3G is in our atmosphere. You've got 4G in our atmosphere, and you've got 5G. And the difference is that 3G and 4G have circular beamforms coming through routers and so forth. And 5G, it gets to a certain point where it's called 26 to 28 gigahertz, where what's called millimeter waves start. So they're very, very small, and they shoot out like laser beams, like bullets in the air. And this has only ever been used for crowd control in the military. And now in Australia, for example, they've auctioned it off and for millions of dollars, and have been given permission to use a technology that's never been tested or proven safe. And with 5G, the reason we say it is ushering in a surveillance state, and that is all, is because it doesn't travel well through dense materials. So they're going to have to cut down a lot of trees. But more than that, they need to get in very close proximity to your home, to your school, to your workplaces, basically to your body, so that it can penetrate from a light pole or a bus shelter or a utility pole into our second floor kids' bedroom window, so that they can understand and read microchips and antennas, which is the goal, in your fridge, in your dog's collar, in your baby's nappy, in your milk cartons, in your
smart devices,
washing machine. Absolutely. Everything needs to be smarted up, talking to the internet so they can read your activity. They can understand how long you shower. They can understand everything about you. And people say all the time, well, I've got nothing to hide. Now, the thing is, we choose to have private moments in our life when we go have showers and have time, with our partners. We don't want to be under a magnifying glass and for that to be some sort of metric for understanding so much about us, because the reason they want everything with microchips and antennas, and why 5G requires these small cells every 200 meters on light poles, utility poles, and bus shelters, etc., all across, our urban areas, is when they get closer and closer to our bodies and closer to the way in which we live our lives, their intention is very much, and this is all available for people to read on government websites, World Economic Forum, they all talk about post-humanism. They want to be able to understand us so well that they can offer us the opportunity to take our consciousness out of our bodies and load it up to some avatar on the internet. It's an out-of-body anti-life agenda. And this is what Hollywood and all these films have been positioning for many, many years and desensitizing people. And if you look deeper at any Marvel film, where heroes are covered up in masks and the idea that a hero even covers their face is quite astounding in the first place. But more so, it's this understanding that you've got to be a hero, you've got to take yourself out of the human form. Avatar is a great example of that. And it's very close to where we are in society, is that the virtual reality just seems so much less painful, so much less real than the current world. And people are so distracted to go somewhere outside of their bodies and into another vortex. And this is where we're at with society. And this is why 5G is absolutely what Robert F. Kennedy Jr. says is brilliant. And he was a massive supporter of our We Are Not Sam campaign. And what he said was that 5G is is ushering in a surveillance state. And it really is the tool for it. It's a weapon of obedience. And that is what 5G stands for. It stands for us being so heavily monitored, tracked, and traced that anything that we do is going to be known. And if you're a dissident and you're going against the government narrative, it's the social credit system, it's the digital IDs, it's all of that, plus moving our bodies out, our consciousness out of our bodies. And on a deeper level, and this is probably going to blow quite a few people's minds, because I know that when I say this, I usually get quite a reaction. And so I'm just preparing people for what I'm about to say. If you look deeper into DNA, and DNA in your body is basically just receiving and transmitting information. It is your body's natural antenna. Now, when you have that much wireless radiation around your body, and a lot of the times connected to things that you've injected into your body, right, through the nanotech, what that does is it plays with our perception. So a lot of people say, well, I've spoken to somebody and they just couldn't see what I was saying and they're frustrated. And a lot of the time is because their perception has been so infiltrated by an alternative reality, an AI reality, that they don't perceive the world the way that you do. And that's why my story at the beginning is so key, because marketing this idea to you about 5G and everything else it can bring is really based on manipulating your perception of reality. And that is at the very core how they're trying to usher in, different narratives to really play on our understanding of reality, to really infiltrate that understanding, and ultimately to create these, what they call, what Elon Musk likes to refer to as like cyborgs, where we're merging with technology. We know that if we were to keep up with the advancements of technology, he says, we have to merge with AI. It's he is nefarious. And I mean, honestly, he's
I
quite
agree.
a crazy man.
Yeah, I completely agree with your statement on Elon Musk. A lot of people seem to think that he's on. Some people are deceived that he's a truther. I think that he does disseminate some truth, but for the most part, I would agree with you that he is a nefarious actor.
Yeah.
And when you brought up the superheroes, I've never heard anybody bring this point up before, and that is like I feel almost like superheroes are a psyop to get people to want to become transhuman, which is the cyborg that Elon Musk talks about. And, you know, what you talked about with the DNA being altered because of the nanotechnology and preventing them to see certain realities, it sort of fits that narrative because it's changing their world, essentially. I mean, they may not be living truthfully, but their perception is definitely distorted, and so I thought that was a very interesting point that you made. Now, I am curious on your thoughts of this because I am very dubious of the agenda of trying to transfer consciousness into an avatar. I've always figured that, not always, but for a while now, after speaking with quite a few transhumanists and how they perceive this to uh, potentially come to fruition, is that my opinion is that I don't think that the consciousness will actually be transferred. I think that they'll just have so much data extracted from you that they'll be able to create this NPC of you that's not even, that doesn't have your consciousness, but it's just your data that can sort of act like you, but it's not you. Now, do you actually think that they will be able to transfer consciousness on this level, or is this nonsense?
Well, there's a project called the Moonshot Project. If you're ready for it, look it up on the government website. And basically on this website, it says that by 2050, humans will exist outside the need for a physical body and mind, time and space. So how do you get there by 2050 unless you actually have to make the necessity of having a human body a burden? And so we've got pandemics and chronic illness and so on and so forth. And we're seeing more and more of that. And intentionally done, obviously, but the perception and the story that goes with it will very much be around uploading your consciousness. Now, whether or not they can create it, I don't believe that you can. I believe that these AI Sophias and so forth that are, already out there now reading people's temperatures on the streets and doing crazy things like this. We have to understand that they're hurrying us towards getting out of our bodies, and whether that's in the physical or whether it's from the conscious, you can't separate it. We are not anything. This is just when I say anything, I mean, this is just a shell, but the consciousness that is in this body is what drives this body to experience the world. So if you take that consciousness and you take people into a vortex that's not real, the body, it can't do anything without the consciousness. It can't do the electromagnetic fields and so forth. It's not functioning. So the reason we need our body and the reason we need our consciousness is because it needs to come together. You cannot, the minute you separate them, you're not having the experience that you came here for. Mm-hmm. So that's what I guess Elon Musk talks about when he puts chips into monkeys' brains and gets them to play video games, and it's tampering that consciousness. He calls it a Fitbit for your skull. And so this idea that we can keep you in your body for a little bit longer, but let's tamper with that consciousness until we can get it all the way out. And once we get it all the way out, we're going to put it somewhere completely different, because the idea that they want people on this physical earth having human experiences is exactly what their agenda is to get us away from that physical experience.
Yeah, and I think something that may be, I guess, working their way towards it, like a stepping stone towards it. Have you heard of synthetic wombs, like artificial wombs?
Yes, I have.
I think, yeah. So for those who are unaware of that, basically you can grow a baby inside of this synthetic artificial womb, and that way the mother never has to deal with pregnancy. I mean, that's sort of the narrative that they're building up towards. And I think that it's been a slow process with birth control and it really, any kind of, in my opinion, reproductive, prevention tools. has sort of been a way to like gear towards that. But I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Like, because to me, it seems that that would be sort of a stepping stone because you're detaching yourself from nature. I mean, then you're just creating art, like cloning babies. It's like Brave New World, literally.
Yes. The biggest question I ask is, who are you and who do you want to become? And honestly, it is probably one of the most difficult questions for people to answer, because they just go through the motions every single day of going to work and providing for their families. And not many people try to know thyself, to really get to that point of understanding, who am I? Why am I here? What am I supposed to feel? And we go back to what we're trained, which is that if you're qualified in this, if you're a tradie, you do tradie, and if you're a marketer, you do marketer, and if you're a pharmacist, you do pharmacist, and so on and so forth. But when I recently did a talk for my community, we have a few hundred people gather every month or so, and they asked me to get up there and speak, and it was just after the flooding. It was quite emotional for a lot of people in our community to come together. And I asked people to raise their hands if they felt called to offer help during the flood crisis. And every single person's hand went up. And I said, please keep your hand up if you felt you were degree or job qualified to do the work that you were doing. And probably half the hands went down. So what I was explaining is that the Creator doesn't call the qualified. He qualified the called. So if you're feeling a calling to do something, that calling is at the very deepest consciousness level, your intuition. It's your guidance system. It comes to you from your ancestral bloodlines. It comes to you from many generations of experience. And people are feeling called to do something, and they're being told, well, because you're not qualified, especially in this region, you're not qualified, you cannot go on that boat and go try to save people, or whatever it might be. And people found ways around that because their calling was stronger than their qualification. And when I say we've got to come back to who we are and our calling and our intuition, we are in this dilemma because we're so disconnected from that guidance system. And we tend to do things, say things, live our lives in a way that doesn't feel in alignment with what that inner guidance system in us is helping to try to express in us. And when we look at this much bigger agenda, and we've got Starlink satellites in the sky, and we've got 5G towers, and we've got baby monitors, and you think, oh gosh, this is all doom and gloom. It's not doom and gloom. It absolutely isn't doom and gloom. The power is in our hands. We can literally disconnect, like disable the 5G network. If we don't buy a 5G phone, that has nothing to speak to. You cannot use a 5G phone and not activate a 5G network. So therefore, you're not using a 5G phone. You are not activating a 5G network. And so we do have certain permissions that we're able to give in terms of what we are feeling. I don't feel I want this phone. I don't feel I want to be giving consent to this agenda. So we wouldn't buy things with microchips and antennas in it, and so on and so forth. Now, that might seem really small to a lot of people, but if you have enough people saying, we won't consent to that, and we're going to create alternative pathways with safe technology. We want fiber optics in our town. We're going to lobby for it. Here we got Australia's first 5G moratorium. We lobbied for it. These are ways in which we have to understand that if we're being called to something and we want to participate in change, this is the moment in history to do it. Now, you might not know what that thing is, but I promise you, if you put yourself in a position where you're ready to find out, it will call you. It will find you, because that calling is already there. It just needs to be activated. And that's where I feel that we're doing incredible work in our community. And I believe many communities around the world are doing similar work, in that we're looking at all of these things that are bombarding us, all this information, all this marketing, all this propaganda. And we're going, oh, what am I feeling about this? My intuition doesn't feel right about this. And we're letting go of statistics and data and percentages. And we're saying something inside of me is far more important than what I'm seeing from Dr. Fauci or from Elon Musk or from Bill Gates and whoever else comes on the screen claiming to be an expert.
So it sounds like your calling was to create We Are Not Sam.
Yeah.
And could you go into a little bit about what you guys are currently doing to sort of combat what's taking place right now?
Yeah, absolutely. We are obviously lobbying heavily for safe technology, which is fiber optic to the premise. So these are like cables that go under the ground, and they're not dangerous to our bodies, and they're not dangerous to nature. And so when you look at even 5G comparing to fiber optics, that's got double the greenhouse gas emissions that are fiber optics. It's just mind-boggling that we have technology available, and all we need to do is educate our communities on the fact that they can use these, Ethernet cables and still use the internet, and that you can turn your Bluetooth off and airplane mode on, and you can turn off your location settings so that you're not constantly being tracked and traced. You can take decisions into your home, into the amount of self-regulating that you do with you and your family, and you become more conscious of, how do I live a life that's more natural? I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't be connected. I'm connected to you right now, Lewis, and I love that the internet brings us connection, but I choose to use it in a way that's meaningful. I choose to use it in a way that is discerning. I don't choose to constantly be on my device because I know that I'm missing out on the natural world the more I'm in that vortex. So I'm choosing. And I think at the very end, what we do as We Are Not Sam is we see ourselves as guides to bring you back to yourself, bring you back to your natural state. And even though technology is a tool, your natural state is far more connected to things that are outside of technology.
Now, this may sound like a very stupid question, but what is the like? Why is a fiber optic cable better than using Wi-Fi?
So you've got wired and you've got wireless. So anything that's wired is not releasing these electromagnetic fields. The wireless is responsible. So these towers, the Wi-Fi units, the mobile phones that magically just work in the middle of the air. And if you look deeper on it, there's 900 handshakes per minute between the nearest tower and your device. It's tracking, updating all your apps, tracking your locations. It's 900 pulses, a handshake per minute. So if we understand that, because we're choosing to be so available to this technology that we can't put ourselves in airplane mode, turning the Bluetooth off and location settings off, even just to minimize how available we are, then we are giving consent to that constant barrage of electromagnetic fields. And so cabling, so things that are wired rather than wireless, it's the electromagnetic fields. It's dispelling them. And so we have to understand the difference between things that are wireless and things that are wired. And that is ultimately the end game, is that we can use technology safely, and we should be having regulations and safety standards in place that do not put iPads, wireless iPads on kids' laps near their reproductive organs for hours in the day. These are not designed to be educators and babysitters. These are tools that should be used in a very safe way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I've heard stories of people who have, kept their cell phones in their front pockets or things of that nature, and they were unable to have children until they stopped doing that. So it does seem to play a huge role in, like manipulating your, I don't know, your biology in some way, which is very interesting.
Yeah, and I
Now,
mean, rectal cancer and testicular cancer, two of the cancers that have been linked to mobile phone use, because that's your pockets, your back pocket and your front pocket, where a lot of people carry their devices. And when they do the test on the dummy, they actually keep the device about 10 millimeters away from his body. So they don't even test the device on his body. And so in the compliance, it should not be on the body. Yet girls are running with them in their breast pockets, on their arms, on the beach. I see it here, back pocket, front pocket. I mean, it's really not designed to be on the body.
so how should one go about carrying their cell phone then? How would you recommend that?
Well, you can carry it. I carry it personally in a Faraday bag.
Okay.
And just there are ways that you can carry phones. I mean, the way that they even say from the very beginning, you probably remember they used to have those belt clips where people would have
Yeah.
a mobile phone about 10 millimeters away from their body. That's because they were testing it 10 millimeters away and they were encouraging these belt clips. I would never encourage a belt clip, but I guess I'm saying is like, if we remember even back then, they were trying to get it away from our bodies. But ultimately, if you're on a phone call, you should have AirPods, which are really not putting the radiation straight in your ears, which are normal earpods. And those wireless ones are terrible. They're probably one of the worst things you could add on your body. Or you just put your phone down on a table and speak on speaker if you need to. And I hardwire my phone if I'm at home. And if I'm on the go, I choose to have less lengthy conversations and I choose when it is that I'm available. I don't make myself available at all times. And people go, oh, emergency, emergency. And I'm like, if you don't have a few hours in your day that you can absolutely disconnect and be fully present, then that's part of the reason we're in this problem in the first place. And if it is an emergency, believe me, people will be able to reach you.
100%. Yeah, we just live in a culture of anxiety. I mean, that's
Yes.
why people say that, because you hear that all the time. And
Yeah.
yeah, I
And
like to think along the same lines. Yeah.
I did a post the other day and it was quite popular. And it was a photo of the president. And he said, why do we need mobile phone towers every 5 kilometers if the president could call the moon in 1969? And it got people thinking, he took a landline, a wired phone, and his famous phone call to the moon on a wired home device. It's
Right.
just, if he can call the moon, believe me, you'll be fine.
Right. Now, this is it's still on topic, but a little off topic from where we're currently at. And that is regarding the jab. A lot of people, and I guess we'll call it the bird flu. I don't know what to call it really. The beer flu. The beer flu. This is a better name for it. Censorship. Got to find ways around it. 5G and that, are they linked? Like, because I know there's a conspiracy with it, and I haven't dug much. I haven't researched at all on this.
Well, I find it linked. We'll talk about this in a few different ways. The coincidence that this jab scene, I don't even know how to say it in another word, to be honest, but that this jab and the 5G would come out at the same time. I mean, I think we're well past coincidences. So you've got both of them have quite a lot in common in terms of having a rig test. This technology, both are technologies. Let's get that straight, that this medical experiment is a technology. 5G is a technology. They are both technologies. And they have us both in fear, in panic, that if we, for example, don't have connectivity, imagine what will happen during the climate crises of today, et cetera, et cetera. So they're really using this as a storyline in both narratives. And I think ultimately, if you look very, very deep into the research or the lack of research and how quickly this needed to be rolled out when we were, in lockdown and so forth, what you'll find is that this nanotechnology, which is being injected into people, into children at the moment here where I live, it does carry in it what are like sensors that can read and write bodily activity. And what we absolutely know is that wireless radiation does interact with nanotechnology. It just does. And if you look into the Internet of Bodies, we've talked about the Internet of Things, how things are connected, but the government is not shy to talk about the Internet of Bodies. And that is that there are certain things that are implanted into the body, whether it's such like Elon Musk's, Neuralink, or whether it's through a jab, where there is technology that can read, write, and manipulate our bodily activity. So if you've got billions of people around the world that have taken a technology into their body that can talk to a technology of 5G that's literally outside their home and read and write and connect everything, then yes, I do believe that they are linked. I do believe that ultimately the surveillance of what is being positioned to come is very much available to those people who are with the nanotechnology right now. And I don't believe that a lot of people would have done it had they not been coerced or risked their jobs or seeing their friends and families. I think that it was done in an appalling way. Jabs have been available for a long time, but to have that level of coercion and that level of indoctrination, it's astounding. So I do think that it's tampering with our perception. I believe that both of those are doing that. It's painting a certain picture of reality where people are afraid to go outside, where people are afraid to live their lives. And ultimately, if we live, the biggest lesson of 5G is to raise our own frequencies. If we are more in touch with nature, with the creator, with our bloodlines, with our guidance systems, if we start to look at the natural rhythms in our bodies, in the world, and we start to connect to that, that is the ultimate security that we have in this world. Security doesn't come from a jab and feeling safe for your health, and it doesn't come from having a job that requires you to be online 24/7. Ultimate security comes in your position, in your place in the world, and your connections to what is real. And if this is a way, which I believe it is, to really figure that out, to really understand our value systems and to get clearer on them, because this is a survival of the fittest. And I'm sorry to say, but if you haven't found your tribe, if you're not doing purposeful calling work, then unfortunately, I don't believe that a lot of people are going to survive these times.
Yeah, it's unfortunate to say, but I do agree with you there. I really do. Now,
Yeah.
what can people do? Because I know We Are Not Sam, rather, is a global movement. So if somebody who, let's say, is in my neck of the woods over here in the United States wanted to do something with We Are Not Sam, how would they go about that?
Well, we'd love for you to sign our petition that you will boycott 5G phones. In other words, you make a pledge that you will not buy a 5G phone. We've obviously got right now a donations button. So we're doing a lot of campaigns worldwide to educate people on all the different layers of technology and how you can use it safely. We've got a 44-page strategy kit on how you can get moratoriums in place in your community. We give people foresight as to what's coming and how to basically lobby, how to be aware of what conversations to have and with whom. And I think these are really important steps that we create for people to create a certain type of energy and a frequency where if we actually say no, if we do not give our consent, then that level of energy is not giving permission for something to exist. And we have to understand how powerful that energy is. And that energy is made even more powerful when we give ourselves alternative pathways to create. And so with those alternative pathways, we are lobbying for fiber optics, and we are lobbying that SpaceX and businesses such as, those will not be able to get away with their 50,000 satellites, which will turn into debris in 1 to 5 years, by the way. We want to be able to educate. And if every person around you is educating on a better way of living and working towards that direction, then the alternative direction has to manifest. It's only when we bang on the door of the old ways and we scream and we fight and we argue and we just do that without moving to the alternative, that is where we get stuck. And that's where a lot of people go through exhaustion, burnout, and they lose their minds, really. So you have to shine a light on the darkness, but you need to move towards the light with the alternative pathways. And that's what we do as We Are Not Sam, is we do both, but we come from that place of giving that space of awareness, because that's the 0 point that we have as humanity, is where we can sit in a place where we're aware of both sides, and we're shining and we're moving and we are creating and we are mobilizing. And if right now, what I tend to hear a lot when I do interviews with for We Are Not Sam is that whole awake tribe community. It's like people that are sitting there awake and they're aware and they're waking up. And I say all the time, it's wonderful that you're awake, but what good is it being awake if you're not out of your bed, on your feet, and creating a change that's needed in this world? And that is where we're at. We are at the rising phase. We're not at the wake phase now. We are at the rising phase. And so everything that we do is on our feet, rising up. We do lobbying our councils. We're putting together community workshops, meetings, conferences, and we're educating. And that education has so much potential because that's what they're doing. It's the counter antidote or the narrative to the perception game that they're playing is that we tell a story of the future that is our vision. So if we don't subscribe to their vision and we don't have a vision of our own, then we'll by default move in that direction that they want us to head in. So we have to get clear in our vision and our goals and work towards them, because if we don't have that, we by default go the other direction.
And where can people find you if they're interested in hearing more of what you have to say?
wearenotsam.com is our website. We also have an Instagram page, which is where we're probably most engaging, and that is instagram.com/wearenotsam, one word. And and people obviously comment. I do a lot of stories every single day, and so interact with the community, see what questions they may have. And I've also got a Telegram channel, We Are Not Sam, as well. So if people want to connect there and they have certain questions or are curious about certain affairs in the world, I tend to answer them as best and as often as I can. And then my only request is that whatever you do learn, that you're not shy to spread it into your communities and to create awareness and to create conversation, because really there's a statistic that says only 5 conversations and it can change the world. So think about that every single time you read something profound or recognize that there's a difficult conversation to be had with people that you care about, and be vulnerable and do it, because 99.99% of the time you'll look back and go, that was worth it.
Well, Rinat, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
You too, Lewis, and I hope to do it again in the future.
Yes.